Lieutenant Daniel Hale did not look back. He stood at the edge of the ravine, radio in hand, and made the call with the calm of a man ordering coffee, not pronouncing a death sentence on one of his own soldiers. Morrison is KIA. We extract now. And just like that, with the blizzard swallowing everything whole, he turned his back on the woman still breathing 40 feet below him in the frozen dark. No verification, no second look, just gone. If you've ever been left behind by someone who was supposed to have your back, someone who owed you their loyalty, then this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Stay with me until the end, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me what city you were watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night they buried Kate Morrison alive in the snow. The grenade went off at 11:47 p.m. Kate Morrison remembered the exact time because she had been checking her watch, a habit, a discipline, the kind of thing they drill into you until it becomes as automatic as breathing. She was 3 steps from the extraction point, 3 steps from making it clean, making it easy, making it the kind of mission that gets written up in a report and filed away without anyone losing sleep. Then the world came apart. The blast didn't knock her sideways. It threw her completely violently, with no respect for physics or training or the fact that she had survived 17 previous operations without a single serious injury. One Claude's response was interrupted. Try again. She did not know how long she had been unconscious. When Kate opened her eyes, the first thing she registered was not pain, it was silence. The kind of silence that only exists when everything that was supposed to protect you has already left. The blizzard was still moving above her, but down in the ravine, tucked between walls of frozen earth and packed snow, the wind barely reached her, which meant the cold was doing its work quietly, without drama, without warning. That was the most dangerous kind. She tried to move her right leg and immediately understood the situation. The sound that came out of her mouth was not a scream, it was something lower. Something controlled the sound of a person who has trained herself not to give the enemy the satisfaction of hearing her suffer. She pressed her teeth together and breathed through her nose until the wave of agony passed. Then she did what she had been trained to do in every scenario, in every simulation, in every brutal field exercise that had broken lesser soldiers in half. She took inventory. Right leg broken. Somewhere between the knee and the ankle, the bone had snapped under the impact of the fall. She could feel the wrongness of it even without looking. Moving it was not an option. Dragging it was the only option. Left hand cut, bleeding but functional. She could close her fingers. She could grip. Rifle gone, lost into the fall or buried somewhere in the snow around her. She searched with her left hand in a slow arc, fingers pushing through the frozen surface, and found nothing. Sidearm still in the holster. She checked it with practiced hands. Loaded. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 shots total, 2 fragmentation grenades on her vest. She had thought she lost both in the blast, but one was still clipped into her chest rig. 1 grenade. 1. Radio dead. The casing was cracked, the screen dark. She held the button and got nothing. Not even static. She released it and set the radio down in the snow next to her like a burial. Then she looked up. The ravine walls were steep, but not impossible. 15 feet, maybe 18. In normal conditions, with 2 working legs and a full kit, she could have been out in under 2 minutes. In these conditions, with what she had left, it was going to take everything. She found a handhold in the frozen earth, pulled herself forward, and started climbing. It took her 41 minutes to get out of the ravine. She knew because she counted. Counting was the only way she could keep her mind from going somewhere she couldn't afford to go, somewhere dark, somewhere furious, somewhere that started asking questions like, why didn't they come back? And did they even look? And was it an accident or was it something else? She couldn't go there. Not yet. So she counted. 1 grip, 2 grip, drag the leg, don't scream, keep counting. When she finally pulled herself over the edge and collapsed face down in the snow on flat ground, she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of stillness. She counted those too. 30 seconds of just breathing, of existing, of being something that was still technically alive despite every physical law suggesting otherwise. Then she raised her head and looked north. Firebase Volkov was approximately 2 miles in that direction. She knew this because she had memorized the mission maps the way other people memorize their children's faces, completely obsessively, with a kind of love that had no room for imprecision. The base sat at the center of a bowl-shaped valley surrounded by elevated terrain on three sides. The enemy had chosen the position deliberately. It was defensible, observable, and from their perspective, completely secure. They had not planned for someone to approach it from the inside of their own perimeter. They had not planned for Kate Morrison. She fashioned a splint from two branches she found at the edge of the tree line, bound it against her leg with the tourniquet from her med kit, and stood up. Standing was its own kind of violence. The pressure on her right leg sent fire straight up through her hip and into her lower spine, and for one terrible second, she thought she was going to pass out again right there on the edge of the ravine she just spent 41 minutes climbing out of. She grabbed the nearest tree trunk, held on, and breathed. "You're not dying here," she said out loud. Not loudly, just a statement of fact delivered into the storm the way you'd tell someone at the time. "Not here, not like this." She started moving north. The first mile took her an hour and 20 minutes. Every step with the right leg was a controlled act of damage. She was making the injury worse with every footfall, and she knew it, and she kept walking anyway. The math was simple: stop and freeze, or move and break. She chose break. She could fix a leg. She could not fix dead. Around the 40-minute mark of the first mile, she heard voices. She dropped immediately, or rather, she dropped her upper body using a boulder as cover, while her broken leg folded under her in a way that made her vision go white at the edges. She pressed her back against the cold stone and listened. Two men, speaking in a language she understood well enough. Enemy patrol, by the sound of it, relaxed, complaining the way soldiers talk when they're cold and bored, and certain nothing interesting is going to happen on their watch tonight. Would be worst assignment in the entire sector. Who puts a patrol out here in this weather? Petrov does. You want to go to explain the weather to Colonel Petrov, be my guest. A pause, boots crunching closer. You think the Americans know about the base? Americans. A short, contemptuous sound. We had a contact earlier tonight. Some reconnaissance unit got close, triggered the outer sensor line. They pulled back fast when the grenade went off. Probably lost someone. Kate's jaw tightened. Probably lost someone. So they're gone. They're gone. Whatever they were looking for, they decided it wasn't worth dying for. The first voice laughed, low, satisfied, the laugh of someone who believes the danger has passed. Smart Americans tonight. Kate waited until the footsteps moved away and the voices faded back into the storm. Then she stayed motionless for another full minute, counting her heartbeats, waiting to be certain. When she was certain, she moved again. But something had shifted inside her. They thought the Americans had pulled back. They thought the threat was gone. They had confirmed a grenade contact and written off whatever came after it, which meant they did not know she was out here, which meant the entire base was operating under the assumption that their perimeter was clean. She was not a threat they were defending against. She was a ghost they didn't know existed. The second mile was faster, not because the pain had lessened, but because she had found something to run toward instead of just running away from freezing to death. She had a target now. She had a reason that was larger than survival, and when Kate Morrison had a reason larger than survival, survival almost became irrelevant. The outer perimeter of Firebase Volkov came into view at what she estimated was roughly 2:40 in the morning. She stopped 40 meters out and went completely still, studying what she could see through the storm. The base was larger than the mission briefing had suggested, or maybe it had grown since the intelligence was gathered. She counted 2 visible guard posts, a vehicle depot on the eastern edge, and at least 3 structures that could have been command or communications buildings. The light from inside the compound bled out through gaps in the barriers, controlled but present. The base was active, people were awake, work was being done, which meant the artillery clock was still running. She identified her entry point in less than 90 seconds. The western fence line between the second guard post and the vehicle depot had a gap in the lighting, a shadow corridor about 12 meters wide, where 2 overlapping fields of coverage created a dead zone. It was the kind of oversight that happened when a base had been in the same location long enough for its defenders to stop seeing it with fresh eyes. They had looked at this fence line so many times they had stopped actually looking at it. Kate looked at it once and saw exactly what she needed. She moved to the western approach, staying low, her right leg dragging in a pattern she had turned into something almost rhythmic. Step with the left drag, the right settle, the weight repeat. The snow absorbed the sound of her movement. The blizzard covered the rest. She reached the fence. She waited. Guard rotation happened every 12 minutes. She had timed it from 40 meters out, watching the movement of the man in the nearest post. In his next rotation, his back would be to her for approximately 45 seconds. 45 seconds to get through the fence and into the dead zone before he turned back around. She checked her sidearm, confirmed the round in the chamber, set it back in the holster. No gunfire? Not yet. Not unless there was no other option. The guard turned. She moved. The fence had a lower section that had been repaired with wire rather than the original material. Someone had cut it at some point, or it had rusted through and the field repair was thorough but not perfect. She found the edge with her fingers, worked it back, and squeezed through in a movement that was more controlled collapse than tactical entry. The broken leg caught on the wire and she felt something tear. She didn't know if it was fabric or skin or something worse, and she couldn't stop to check. She was through. She pressed herself flat against the inner wall of the barrier and listened. Nothing changed. No shout, no alarm. The guard completed his rotation and came back to face outward, seeing exactly what he expected to see. Empty terrain, snowstorm, nothing of interest. Kate was already inside the base. She took her first full breath since the fence and tried to organize her mind. She was in. She was alive. She had no rifle, 8 rounds and a handgun, 1 grenade, a broken leg, and she was standing inside an active enemy fire base surrounded by soldiers who outnumbered her by what she estimated was roughly 40-1. By any rational calculation, she was already dead. She had stopped making rational calculations somewhere around the first mile of that crawl north. The first building she approached was smaller, a utility structure, by the look of the equipment stacked outside it. She pressed against the exterior wall and listened. 2 voices inside, low, routine. She moved past it without making contact. The second building was different. Through a gap in the exterior, she could see the glow of electronic equipment, screens, consoles, the kind of multi-panel setup that meant either communications or targeting. Her pulse ticked up. That was a building worth knowing about. But she needed to understand the base layout first. Going straight for the communications center without knowing her escape routes was the kind of move that got you killed, not by the enemy, but by your own impatience. She kept moving, building by building, shadow by shadow, cataloging the base in her mind like a map she was drawing in real time. Then she heard it. A voice above the others, clearer and more deliberate than the casual conversation of bored soldiers, coming from the largest structure near the center of the base. She moved closer. Timeline has been moved. The window is no longer 0400. Acknowledge the updated coordinates and confirm your battery is ready to fire on my command. A pause. I don't care about the weather conditions. Weather is a civilian concern. You will fire when I tell you to fire. Acknowledge. Another pause. Good. Stand by. Kate pressed herself against the exterior of the building and processed what she had just heard. The strike window had been moved. She did not know the original timeline. She had been unconscious at the bottom of a ravine when whatever briefing happened, but she knew what an artillery command sounded like, and she knew what fire on my command meant, and she knew that coalition forces were somewhere north of this position operating under intelligence that was now wrong. Someone was going to die tonight because the clock had just changed, and nobody on the coalition side knew it. Nobody except her. She checked her sidearm one more time, the gesture automatic, the way some people touch a religious medallion before something difficult, and moved to find the door. The man giving orders was Colonel Petrov. She didn't know his face yet, but she already understood what she was dealing with. He was not operating from a fixed plan. He was adjusting in real time, moving pieces, changing windows, compensating for variables. He was not a target sitting still, waiting to be neutralized. He was a living command system, and he was currently winning. She found a secondary entrance on the northern side of the building, half hidden behind a stack of supply crates. The door was metal, unlocked in a secure base, and internal doors don't need locks because the perimeter is the lock. She eased it open 1 centimeter at a time, listening for the hinge, keeping the motion so slow it produced no sound worth hearing. Inside a narrow corridor, 2 doors on the left, 1 on the right. The voice was coming from behind the door on the right. She moved to the left doors first. The first one opened onto a storage space, equipment supply. Nothing useful except the knowledge that it existed. The second one opened onto something much more valuable, a secondary communications terminal. Smaller than what she had glimpsed in the other building, older equipment, but functional and currently unoccupied. She stepped inside, eased the door shut behind her, and sat down at the terminal. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this the way you notice weather as a fact, not as a problem. Shaking hands could still operate a radio. Shaking hands had done harder things tonight. She studied the equipment for 30 seconds, identifying the frequency controls, the transmit functions, the channel selectors. The setup was older than what she'd trained on, but the logic was the same. Radio was radio, signal was signal. She found the coalition emergency frequency and set it by memory, a 7-digit sequence she had memorized the same way she memorized maps obsessively, completely without room for error. She keyed the transmit. Static. She adjusted the antenna coupling and tried again. More static, but this time underneath it she heard something. The faint, unmistakable rhythm of a carrier signal. Someone was on the other end. Someone was listening. She leaned close to the microphone and kept her voice at the lowest possible volume that could still carry meaning. Broken Falcon to any coalition element. Broken Falcon to any coalition element. Authentication Sierra 79er Delta. Strike timeline has been updated at source. Repeat, strike timeline has changed. Requesting immediate contact. Over. She released the transmit key and waited. 12 seconds of static that felt like 12 years. Then a voice. Careful disbelieving, checking itself against what it was hearing. Station calling, Broken Falcon, authenticate again. Full sequence. She gave the full authentication sequence. Her voice stayed level. Her hands kept shaking. A longer pause this time. She could hear movement on the other end, voices, consulting with each other, the controlled confusion of people who had just received information that contradicted everything they thought they knew. Then the voice came back. Broken Falcon, we have you listed as KIA. Confirm your status. Kate closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. I'm very much alive, she said, and I'm transmitting from inside Firebase Volkov. The strike window has been moved. I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you to believe it because I'm not going to have long before someone notices this terminal is active. Another pause. We're listening, Broken Falcon. Go ahead. She started talking. And somewhere on the other side of the blizzard, in a command post that had already written her name on a casualty report, people began furiously erasing what they thought they knew. The voice on the other end of the radio had a name, Captain Reed, Forward Operations Call Sign Anvil. Kate had never met him. She knew him only as a voice that had gone from careful disbelief to something harder and faster in the span of about 90 seconds, which told her everything she needed to know about the man. He was the kind of officer who adjusted quickly. Good. She needed quick. Broken Falcon, confirm you are currently inside Firebase Volkov, inside the wire. Confirmed. Secondary communications terminal, northern structure, center of base. I have approximately, she paused, listening to the sounds from the corridor outside the door. Maybe 4 minutes before someone does a routine check on this terminal, possibly less. So I need you writing, not talking. A beat. Then go. Strike window has been moved forward. I don't have the exact new time I intercepted, a partial order from what I believe is the base commander. Voice authority, single speaker, giving updated coordinates to what sounded like an artillery battery at a remote position. The original 0400 window is no longer valid. They are ready to fire on command, meaning the trigger is human, not timed. The commander here controls the launch. Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that means people are moving fast. Can you identify the commander? Not by face, by voice and behavior. He's operating from the large central structure. He called himself. She paused, reconstructing the fragment she'd heard through the wall. He didn't identify himself by name. But he spoke with absolute authority. Single decision maker, no consultation. That's your man. Broken Falcon, Reed's voice dropped slightly. Coalition forces in the northern grid are currently moving into staging positions for a dawn operation. If that artillery fires before we can redirect... I know, Kate said. That's why I'm talking to you from inside an enemy base with a broken leg and 8 rounds in my sidearm, instead of waiting in the snow for someone to come find me. A pause that might in another context have contained something like respect. What do you need from us? Time. Buy me time. Do not launch any air assets toward this position yet. If they hear aircraft patrol, fires immediately. Let me work the inside. I'll get you a hard confirmation on the new strike window if I can. If I can't, she stopped, recalibrated. If I can't, I'll find another way to stop the launch from here. Broken Falcon, I cannot authorize a solo operative to... Captain? Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the static like a blade. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you what's happening. You can log this conversation however you need to log it. But right now, I'm the only asset you have inside this base, and we both know it. Another silence. Longer this time. Understood. We hold air assets. You have 30 minutes, Broken Falcon, before command overrides me, and we have no choice. 30 minutes, she repeated. Copy. She clicked off the transmit and sat for exactly 3 seconds in the dark of the secondary terminal room, letting the number settle in her chest like a stone. 30 minutes. She had crawled 2 miles through a blizzard with a broken leg and infiltrated an active enemy firebase. And now she had 30 minutes to do something that a full special operations team would have needed hours and a dozen people to accomplish. She stood up, checked her sidearm, and moved back to the door. The corridor was still empty. The voice behind the right side door had gone quiet. Either Petrov was finished with his transmission or he was listening rather than speaking. Kate pressed her ear against the door and heard what sounded like the shuffling of papers, the movement of a man working through something methodical and detailed. Planning. Still planning. Good. Planning men were predictable men. She moved back down the corridor and out through the secondary entrance back into the cold. She needed 2 things before she could move on the communications center. She needed to know the layout of the interior guard rotations, and she needed a weapon that wasn't going to announce her presence to every soldier in the compound the moment she used it. The answer to the second problem was standing approximately 20 meters to her left. A guard alone walking his interior rotation with his rifle slung across his back in the casual manner of a man who has not been given a reason to be alert. Kate watched him for 60 seconds, timed his pace, identified his pattern. He moved in a circuit this wall, the corner, the adjacent wall back. The circuit took him approximately 4 minutes. At the midpoint of his circuit, there was a gap of roughly 20 seconds where his back was to her, and he was farthest from any other visible position. She waited for the midpoint. When it came, she moved. What happened next lasted 11 seconds. Kate did not allow it to be loud, did not allow it to be complicated, and did not allow herself to think about it in any terms other than operational necessity. The guard went down. She lowered him carefully rather than letting him fall. A falling body makes sound, a lowered body makes almost none. She took his rifle, confirmed it was loaded, slung it across her own back, and was back in the shadow of the northern structure before the next 60 seconds had elapsed. She paused, listened. Nothing had changed in the base's ambient noise. No shout, no alarm, no change in the rhythm of the compound. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 23 minutes left. The armory was the next objective. Not because she needed more weapons, the rifle she just acquired changed her tactical picture significantly, but because the armory was the one place in any firebase where you could create maximum disruption with minimum personnel. Ammunition stores. Ordnance. The kind of materials that properly arranged could give a single person the ability to make 40 soldiers respond to the wrong problem at the wrong moment. She found it on the eastern edge of the compound, exactly where she'd estimated it might be based on the base layout she'd cataloged on her way in. The door was secured with a padlock, substantial, not decorative. She studied it for 10 seconds and then looked at the door itself rather than the lock. The door was metal, but the frame it sat in was older, and the upper hinge had been repaired at some point with hardware that didn't quite match the original. She filed this information away. She didn't need to go in right now. She needed to know it was there, know its position relative to everything else, and know how long it would take her to reach it when the time came. 2 minutes had passed since she'd left the corridor. She was ahead of her own internal timeline, which meant something was about to go wrong. In Kate's experience, the only time you ran ahead of schedule in a hostile environment was when the environment was about to change the schedule for you. She was right. The alarm was not loud. It was a short, controlled tone, 3 pulses repeated, that she heard first from somewhere near the vehicle depot and then picked up in 2 or 3 other locations almost simultaneously. Not a full base alert, a localized signal, which meant someone had found the guard she'd taken down. The base shifted. It was subtle at first. The change in voice tones, the sound of boots moving with purpose rather than routine, the way the ambient noise of a working military facility recalibrates when something unexpected enters the equation. Kate pressed herself into the narrowest available shadow and stayed completely still, counting the seconds, reading the sounds. Western interior soldier down check, all internal positions report by section. The voice was commanding, organized, and very close. An officer, not Petrov, different pitch, different cadence. A duty officer running the base's internal response. Voices began reporting in sequence, section by section. She listened to each one. North section clear, east section clear, south section a pause slightly longer than the others. Then clear. Vehicle depot, clear. She counted 7 sections reporting before the sequence returned to the duty officer. Tighten all internal rotations. Nobody moves without a partner until I say otherwise. And someone get me the colonel. Kate's pulse ticked up. They were going to tell Petrov that something had happened inside his base. And Petrov was the kind of man who responded to unexpected information by changing his plans. If he changed his firing plan in response to a security incident, moved the window again, or worse, moved it forward to the earliest possible moment, she had to move now. She gave herself 2 seconds to revise her entire operational picture. The communications center was no longer a secondary objective reached after careful preparation. It was the immediate objective reached before Petrov could respond to the security alert and alter his timeline in a way she couldn't intercept. She had to get there before he got the report. Or she had to get there at exactly the same time as the report while he was still processing it. She chose the second option. A man processing a security report is a distracted man. A distracted man can be surprised even when he's trying not to be. She moved toward the central structure at a pace that was just short of running fast enough to cover ground controlled enough not to produce the sounds of someone running. The broken leg screamed at her with every step, and she screamed back at it internally, a purely silent argument between her discipline and her body's increasingly reasonable objection to what she was asking of it. She reached the main entrance of the central structure just as a soldier emerged from the side. They were both surprised. Kate recovered first. She took the soldier down before he could produce a sound, used his body weight against him in a way that was efficient and final, and stepped over him through the door he'd just come out of. Inside, a wider corridor than the northern structure, better lit, more active. 2 soldiers at the far end moving away from her. Another door on the right slightly ajar, and through it she could hear the controlled, irritated voice of a man who had just been told that one of his interior guards had been neutralized. Single contact, unidentified. How did a contact get inside the wire? A second voice, more defensive. Sir, the outer perimeter reported clear. The outer perimeter reported clear, and I have a man down inside my own base. A pause that carried a specific kind of danger in it. Someone is in here with us. Find them. Kate was already inside the room. She moved through the actor door with the rifle up, and the scene she entered resolved itself in less than a second. Petrov standing with his back partially turned, speaking to a duty officer near a table covered in maps and radio equipment. A third man near the communications console. 2 others near the far wall. 5 people. She had 8 rounds. Nobody move. The words came out of her mouth in the enemy's language, accented, imperfect, but completely understandable. The effect was immediate. Every person in the room went still in the specific way that people go still when they realize a gun is pointed at them from a direction they didn't expect. Petrov turned slowly. He was older than she'd imagined from the voice, late 50s, heavy-set, with the particular stillness of a man who has survived enough dangerous situations to know that sudden movement is not helpful. His eyes went to the rifle first, then to her face, then down briefly to her leg. She saw him register the splint. She saw him calculate. You're injured, he said, in his own language, then switching deliberately to English. Badly, you can barely stand. I'm standing well enough, Kate said. Step away from the communications console. Everyone, move to the back wall. Nobody moved immediately. There was the half-second delay of people looking at each other, looking at Petrova, waiting for a signal. Petrov gave no signal. He simply studied her. You're the American who went into the ravine, he said. Not a question. The tone of a man connecting pieces that had just fallen into place. We believed you were dead. You believed wrong. She kept the rifle absolutely steady. The shaking in her hands that had been present all night had for this moment completely stopped. Console, back wall, now. Petrov moved. The others followed. She kept the rifle on them and moved sideways toward the communications console, keeping them all in her field of vision. The console was exactly what she needed: full transmission capability, direct connection to the artillery battery. She could see the active channel still glowing on the frequency display. "How many people know the updated strike window?" she asked. Petrov said nothing. "How many people know the updated strike window?" she repeated. "I'm asking because if the answer is more than one, I have a problem. And if I have a problem, so does everyone in this room." "It doesn't matter," Petrov said calmly. "Even if you destroy this console, the battery commander has his orders. He will fire on the original timeline that is a contingency." Kate processed this in about 1 second. "What's the contingency window?" Silence. "Colonel." She adjusted the rifle slightly, not toward him, just a micro movement, a reminder of its presence. "I spent 2 miles and 3 hours getting here. I am not leaving without the information I came for." "What is the contingency window?" He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. This was a different kind of combat than anything physical. It was the contest of two people deciding how much the other one was actually willing to do. Kate had already crossed so many lines tonight that there weren't many left for her to cross. She thought Petrov could see that. 0330, Bayoni said finally. "If I do not transmit a confirmation code by 0330, the battery fires on the original coordinates." Kate checked her watch. 0330 was 11 minutes away. 11 minutes. "Then we're going to have a conversation," she said, "and you're going to transmit that confirmation code." Petrov smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who has just realized he still has a card to play. "And why would I do that?" he said. "Because Kate said the coalition already knows I'm in here. If that battery fires, they have air assets that will level this base within minutes. Transmit the confirmation code, and you have leverage: a prisoner, an intelligence asset, a negotiation. Don't transmit it, and there is no base left for anyone to negotiate from." The smile stayed, but something behind his eyes shifted. She watched him calculate, watched him run the same math she had just run from his side of the equation. 9 minutes to the contingency window. "You're bluffing," he said. "If coalition air assets were responding, we'd have heard them already." "You haven't heard them because I asked them to hold." She met his eyes without blinking. "I told them to give me time. That time is almost up, Colonel. And when it runs out, I stop being the thing standing between you and a strike package." 8 minutes. The room was completely silent. One of the other soldiers near the back wall shifted his weight slightly, a nervous movement, involuntary. Petrov didn't look at him. He kept looking at Kate. She kept looking at him. 7 minutes. "The confirmation code," Petrov said slowly, "is a voice authentication. It requires my voice. Then use it. If I authenticate and the battery commander hears anything unusual in my tone, then you'll speak normally," Kate said. "You'll speak exactly the way you always speak, because you're smart enough to know that your best chance of getting out of this base tonight is the option or I'm offering you right now." 6 minutes. Petrov looked at the communications console, looked at Kate, looked at the console again. Then he walked to the console. Kate kept the rifle up and watched every person in the room as Petrov reached for the transmit key. Watch their hands. Watch their eyes. Watch for the signal she knew would come if he decided to use the transmission as something other than what she'd asked for. He keyed the transmit, spoke the confirmation code in a voice that was steady, professional, and she listened for this: carefully authentic. No warning tones, no embedded alerts, just the code delivered cleanly. The response from the battery commander was brief. "Confirmation received. Standing by." Petrov released the key and turned back to face her. The artillery strike had just been stood down. Kate exhaled through her nose, one controlled breath, the same breath she'd been managing since the bottom of a frozen ravine 3 hours and an entire lifetime ago. But the room wasn't safe. The base wasn't safe. And the 11-minute window she just bought was already collapsing into something else because the duty officer near the back wall had his hand 2 inches from the alarm panel on the wall beside him, and he had been moving it there so slowly for the last 4 minutes that she had been watching the progress without reacting. She reacted now. Move that hand another inch, she said quietly, and the colonel answers for it. The duty officer froze. Petrov looked at his duty officer, then back at Kate. You have very good peripheral vision for someone operating on no sleep and a broken leg. I've had a long night, Kate said. Get away from the wall. The duty officer stepped away from the wall. Outside the building, the base was still running its heightened internal security sweep. Boots were moving. Voices were reporting. The net was tightening around the exact location where Kate Morrison was standing, and she knew it, and so did everyone in the room with her. 30 minutes had become 11. 11 had become 0. She had done what she set out to do. The artillery strike was aborted. Coalition Command knew she was alive, and she had the base commander standing 5 feet away from her under the rifle she'd taken off his own guard. What she did not have was an exit, and the sounds outside the building were getting closer. The boots outside were not random. Kate could hear the difference between soldiers doing a general sweep and soldiers who had been told to converge on a specific building. These were converging. Someone had seen something, a door left slightly wrong, a shadow moving at the wrong angle. The guard she'd taken down found sooner than she'd calculated. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that the net was pulling tight around the central structure, and she had maybe 3 minutes before the first of them came through the door. She looked at Petrov. He looked back at her with the particular expression of a man who has just done the math and realized the arithmetic is shifting back in his favor. Your exit, he said, does not exist. Not yet, Kate said. She moved to the communications console without taking the rifle off the room and keyed back to the coalition frequency. Reed picked up in under 4 seconds. He had been waiting, she realized, sitting there with his hand on the radio, waiting for her to come back. Broken Falcon, status. Strike aborted. Confirmation code transmitted by Petrov himself. Battery is standing down. I need extraction coordinates, and I need them now. I'm inside the central command structure. Situation is about to get loud. A pause shorter than she expected. Reed had been doing his own planning while she was doing hers. We have a fast mover that can be on station in 8 minutes. Can you mark a landing zone? Negative, active base, no safe LZ inside the wire. I need something else. Broken Falcon, what do you have? She thought for exactly 2 seconds, which was all she could afford. I have the base commander, and I have 1 grenade. A longer pause. Are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you that if I can get to the eastern vehicle depot, I can create enough chaos to reach the outer perimeter on the northern side. I need your fast mover to light up the southern approach, not the base the approach at my signal. Draw their attention south while I move north. Can you do that? That is an extremely thin plan, Broken Falcon. Everything I've done tonight has been an extremely thin plan, Captain. Has any of it failed yet? Another pause. Then something in Reed's voice shifted, not quite admiration, but the closest a military radio transmission could carry. 8 minutes, call it when you're ready. Anvil out. Kate clicked off and turned back to the room. Petrov was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite fear, but existed in the territory between them. He had been running calculations this entire time, she knew, trying to find the moment where her plan had a gap he could use. What she saw on his face now told her he hadn't found it yet. You're going to walk out of here, he said. Not a question, more like a man confirming something that surprised him. We're going to walk out of here, Kate said. You're coming with me. The duty officer near the back wall made a sound, not quite an objection, not quite a warning, something between the two. Petrov silenced him with a single look. If I come with you, Petrov said carefully, what happens to my men? Your men stay in this building until I'm clear of the perimeter. Nobody gets hurt if nobody makes a decision that hurts them. That is the only guarantee I can offer you, and it's an honest one. He considered this. Outside, the boots were close now. She could hear them on the near side of the building, voices coordinating a sweep pattern. The others stay here, Petrov said finally. He said it partly to Kate and partly to the people in the room, a command embedded in a statement. Nobody moves until I give the order. The duty officer looked like he wanted to argue. He looked at the rifle in Kate's hands. He stayed quiet. Move, Kate said to Petrov. Northern exit, slowly. They went into the corridor together, Petrov in front. Kate 1 step behind and to his left, rifle angled at the center of his back in a way that was invisible from the front, but absolutely clear from his perspective. He walked with the controlled pace of a man who understood the geometry of his situation completely. She gave him credit for that. They were halfway down the corridor when the door at the southern end opened. A soldier stepped through, young alert rifle coming up immediately because he had been briefed to expect a threat. His eyes went to Petrov, first then to Kate, then to the rifle at Petrov's back, and in that exact sequence of recognition, his weapon tracked toward her. "Stand down." Petrov's voice was immediate, flat, and completely authoritative. "Stand down. Do not fire." The soldier hesitated, one terrible second of hesitation where anything could have happened. Then the training took over. He had been given an order by the senior officer present. He lowered the weapon. "Go back to the south entrance," Petrov said. "Tell the duty officer I am conducting a security check of the northern perimeter. Nobody follows." "Understood." The soldier looked at Kate one more time, then at Petrov. "Sir." "Understood." "Yes, sir." He backed through the door. Kate released the breath she'd been holding and kept moving. "That was either very cooperative of you," she said quietly, "or you just sent him to get reinforcements." "I sent him to buy us both 40 seconds, Petrov said, "which is what we both need right now." She wasn't sure she believed him, but the 40 seconds existed regardless of his motive, and she used them. They came out through the northern exit into the cold. The base was in motion all around them, soldiers moving, voices checking in the organized urgency of a security sweep that had not yet found what it was looking for. Kate steered Petrov toward the vehicle depot, keeping close, keeping the rifle positioned where his own people couldn't see it clearly enough to take a clean shot without risking him. This was the calculation. This was why he was still walking beside her instead of being left in a room with zip ties. A rifle pointed at her was a soldier making a decision. A rifle pointed near a colonel was a soldier making a career-ending mistake. Nobody shoots at the thing standing next to their commanding officer. Not until they're certain, and certainty takes time. She was buying time in every direction simultaneously. The vehicle depot was 40 meters away. 30. She moved Petrov at an angle that used the largest vehicle mass as a visual barrier between them and the main cluster of activity near the center of the base. 20 meters. Then Petrov said very quietly, "You know this doesn't work, don't you? Keep walking. I have 40 soldiers in this base. Even if you reach the outer perimeter, you have a broken leg. You cannot move faster than healthy men. They will catch you before you reach cover. Keep walking, Colonel." "I'm not threatening you," he said, and his tone was strange enough that she almost believed him. "I'm telling you something honest. You accomplished what you came here to do. The strike is aborted. My battery is standing down. What you are doing right now, this escape, this is the part that doesn't work." 10 meters from the depot. "The part where I escaped a frozen ravine with a broken leg didn't work either," Kate said. "The part where I infiltrated your base alone with 8 rounds didn't work. The part where I got your confirmation code at gunpoint didn't work. I've been doing things that don't work all night, Colonel. I've gotten good at it." She heard something shift in him at that. Not a change of allegiance, nothing so dramatic. More like the sound a man makes internally when he realizes he has fundamentally misjudged the person he's dealing with. They reached the vehicle depot. Kate positioned Petrov against the largest vehicle and checked her watch. 6 minutes since she'd spoken to Reed, 2 minutes to the fast mover's arrival window. She pulled the radio and keyed the frequency. "Broken Falcon to Anvil. I'm at the vehicle depot, eastern edge, ready for the diversion. South approach. Call it on my mark." Reed's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed, on your mark, Broken Falcon." She looked at Petrov. "Here's what happens now. In about 90 seconds, there is going to be a significant noise event on the southern side of this base. Every person in this compound is going to look south. In that window, you and I are going to move north. When we reach the outer fence, your part of this is done. I release you there." "You release me at the perimeter," he said slowly. "And then what I watch you cross open ground on a broken leg while my soldiers reorganize. That's my problem. It's a significant problem. I've had worse ones tonight." Something moved across his face, complicated, unresolved, the expression of a man working through something that didn't fit neatly into any category he'd prepared for. Kate watched it happen and didn't try to interpret it. She didn't have time to interpret it. "Broken Falcon," Reed's voice in her ear. "Fast mover is 1 minute out. Say the word." She looked north toward the outer fence. She looked at Petrov. "Mark," she said into the radio. The southern approach lit up. It was not a bombing run. Reed had been precise about that, following her instruction to target the approach rather than the base itself. What came instead was a combination of illumination ordnance and suppression fire that turned the southern sky into something that demanded every human eye in the compound turn toward it. The sound arrived a half-second after the light, a series of percussive impacts that rolled through the ground under Kate's feet and rattled everything that wasn't bolted down. The base reacted exactly as she'd predicted. Voices snapped south, movement surged south. The radio traffic she could hear through her earpiece went from organized security sweep to urgent southern threat response in under 10 seconds. She moved. "Come on," she said to Petrov, and she didn't wait to see if he followed. She moved north at the best pace her broken leg would allow, which was faster than it should have been and slower than she needed it to be. Every step was a controlled act of damage. She had stopped feeling the injury as pain approximately 40 minutes ago and had started processing it purely as information. The right leg is compromised. Adjust weight distribution. Keep moving. Petrov followed. She heard his footsteps behind her and chose not to examine too carefully why he was cooperating. There were several possible reasons, and she didn't have the cognitive bandwidth to evaluate them. He was there. He was moving. That was enough. The outer fence was 60 meters away. 50. She kept moving and kept the rifle ready and kept one part of her attention on Petrov's position and another part on the sounds from the rest of the base, which were still predominantly oriented south. 40 meters. That was when the soldier stepped out from behind the equipment storage unit directly to her left. He was not part of the southern response. He was either the most disciplined soldier in the base or the one who hadn't heard the diversion clearly enough to redirect. He had his rifle up, and he had seen her before she saw him, and the angle was wrong. She couldn't bring her own weapon around fast enough from this position. She heard Petrov's voice. "Put it down, Sergeant." The soldier, young, locked up tight with the particular fear of a man who has found himself between two conflicting orders, looked at Petrov. "Sir, this is the—" "I know who this is," Petrov said. His voice was utterly calm. "Put the weapon down." "Sir, I can't." "Sergeant." And now there was something in the word that was not calm, something underneath the calm that was harder and colder than anything Kate had heard from him yet. "I have given you a direct order. You will follow it, or you will explain to me personally why you chose not to." The rifle came down. Kate was already moving again. She didn't look at Petrov, didn't acknowledge what he'd just done, didn't slow down, didn't allow herself to process the complexity of it. There was a fence 30 meters away, and she was going to be at it in the next 90 seconds. 30 meters. 20. She heard Petrov stop walking behind her. She knew without looking that she had reached the edge of what his cooperation was going to cover. This was the perimeter. Beyond it was her problem. She reached the fence and found the same type of repair wire section she'd identified on the western side during her entry. She worked it back with one hand, keeping the rifle angled generally toward the base. "Morrison," she stopped. Petrov had used her name. She didn't know how he knew it, and it was not the moment to ask. She turned enough to see him. He was standing 10 meters back, arms at his sides, not reaching for anything, not signaling anyone, just standing, looking at her with that complicated expression that she still didn't have a category for. "The battery commander," he said. "He will want a second confirmation call within the next 20 minutes. If he doesn't receive it, he may decide to fire on his own initiative." Kate held herself completely still. "Are you telling me to come back?" she said. "I'm telling you a fact," Petrov said. "What you do with it is your business." She looked at him for 2 full seconds. "Can you reach him on your radio?" "Yes." "Then call him now, before I cross this fence." Petrov reached slowly for the radio on his belt. Kate watched every millimeter of the movement. He raised it, keyed it, spoke the second confirmation code, different from the first. She noticed a secondary authentication she hadn't known existed. The battery commander responded, acknowledged, confirmed, "Stand down." Petrov lowered the radio. "Now," he said, "you can go." Kate looked at him one more time. She had a lot of questions that this was not the time or place for. She filed them away in the same part of her mind that had been filing impossible things all night. "Why?" she said. He considered this for what felt like a long time but was probably 3 seconds. Because 41 soldiers dying in their sleep is not a victory I want on my record, even if they are the enemy. She didn't respond to that. She turned, worked herself through the fence, and was on the other side before he could say anything else. The open ground beyond the perimeter was approximately 400 meters of exposure between her and the tree line. She knew this because she had measured it on the way in. 400 meters with a broken leg and whatever time remained before the base reorganized enough to redirect attention north. She started running. It was not running in any athletic sense. It was controlled, forward collapse, her left leg driving and her right leg dragging in a pattern that was losing coherence fast because the injury had been worsening for hours, and the splint was failing, and the pain that had stopped being pain was starting to be pain again, loudly, insistently, in a way that was becoming very hard to process as merely informational. 200 meters. Her radio crackled. Reed's voice, "Broken Falcon, we have a visual on your position. Hold on." "Not planning to stop," she said, which was not entirely a joke. 150 meters. Behind her, she heard the base coming back around the sounds of the southern diversion, fading attention, beginning to redistribute, voices starting to ask the question of where the colonel was and why the northern section wasn't reporting in yet. 100 meters. Her right leg gave way. Not metaphorically, the leg simply stopped, holding weight in the way it had been barely holding weight all night, and she went down hard into the snow. And for one long, terrible second, she was back at the bottom of the ravine, in the moments right after the blast, the silence, the cold, the impossible math of what came next. She got back up, not quickly, not gracefully. She got her left leg under her and pushed and dragged and got vertical again and kept moving because there was no alternative to moving except not moving, and she had already decided about that. 50 meters. She heard the helicopter before she saw it, the distant thrum growing rapidly into the immediate concussive sound of rotors, and then lights, and then it was there coming in fast and low from the northeast, exactly where she would have positioned it if she'd been the one planning the extraction. She crossed into the tree line and kept moving toward the sound. 20 meters, 10. The helicopter settled into a hover at the edge of the trees rather than landing. The ground wasn't right for a full landing, or Reed had made the call to stay light and fast. A crew member was at the door reaching down, and Kate reached up, and the grip that closed around her forearm was the first human contact she'd had in hours that wasn't an act of combat. She was pulled upward with a force that bypassed her right leg entirely, which was the most considerate thing anyone had done for her all night. She collapsed into the interior of the helicopter, and the door came closed, and the aircraft tilted and rose, and she watched through the small window as Firebase Volkov fell away below her, still active, still lit, but growing smaller, becoming a thing that was behind her rather than around her. The crew member was saying something. Medical questions, she realized. Was she conscious? Was she hit? Could she tell him her name? She answered all three. "Morrison," she said. "Kate Morrison, Sergeant. Call sign Frost." He was already cutting the splint away from her leg to assess the injury underneath. She let him work and turned her face toward the window and watched the base disappear into the blizzard below. She had gone in with 8 rounds and 1 grenade and a broken leg. She was coming out with 41 people alive who hadn't known they were in danger. And somewhere behind her in that compound, a colonel was standing at his outer fence, looking north at a helicopter he had chosen not to shoot down, for reasons that she suspected he would spend a very long time explaining to people who had not been in the room when it happened. She didn't try to make sense of it. She was too tired, and her leg was starting to communicate his full opinion of the night's activities in terms that left very little room for complex moral reflection. Reed's voice came through her earpiece one final time. "Broken Falcon, you are confirmed extracted. Welcome back to the living." Kate leaned her head against the cold metal wall of the helicopter and closed her eyes. "I never left," she said. "The cast came off on a Tuesday." Kate sat on the edge of the examination table and watched the orthopedic surgeon, a methodical man named Carver, who communicated primarily in millimeters and degrees of flexion, run his assessment with the focused efficiency of someone who has evaluated enough broken soldiers to have stopped being surprised by any of them. He bent her knee. He rotated the ankle. He pressed 2 fingers along the line of the tibia where the fracture had been and watched her face for the response. She gave him nothing. Not because she wasn't feeling it, she was, But because she had spent 8 weeks in a facility where the primary activity was physical therapy and the secondary activity was waiting, and she had gotten very good at sitting with discomfort without advertising it. Healing is ahead of schedule, Carver said, making a note without looking up. Significantly ahead, actually. How aggressive has the physical therapy been? As aggressive as they'd allow, Kate said. He looked up at that, and outside of sessions, she said nothing. He studied her for a moment with the expression of a man who has asked this question before and knows exactly what the non-answer means. Sergeant Morrison, the recovery protocol exists because bone remodeling is not something you can discipline your way through faster than biology allows. If you've been, I'm healed ahead of schedule, Kate said. You just said so. Carver set his pen down. I did say so. He looked at the imaging results, looked at her. I'm clearing you for graduated return to physical training. Light duty in 6 weeks pending evaluation. Full operational clearance. He paused, calculating. We're looking at 4 months from today if everything continues at this rate. 4 months. She had been told 8 to 10. She had worked it down to 4. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Carver said. Thank whatever it is inside you that apparently does not accept the standard timeline for anything. She got dressed, walked out of the medical facility on her own 2 legs, both of them weight-bearing functional, and stood outside in the cold morning air for a moment. The cold didn't bother her the way it used to, or rather, it bothered her in a different way now. Cold had become a thing she had already negotiated with at its absolute worst, and everything since had been a lighter version of that conversation. Her phone rang. It was Marcus, the intelligence officer with the one-name introduction and the photograph of Petrov. Morrison, good timing. Are you somewhere you can talk? I'm standing outside my medical appointment, she said. I just got cleared for graduated return. Congratulations. Walk while we talk. A brief pause, the sound of a door closing on his end. The Petrov intelligence package, full processing is complete. She started walking. And it's bigger than we thought, which is saying something because we already thought it was significant. His voice had a specific quality, the quality of someone delivering information that has changed the shape of something important. The network he gave us wasn't just the artillery coordination for 3 sectors. It was the communication infrastructure for an entire regional command structure. 14 months of build-out, 17 active nodes, 40-plus personnel who are now being rolled up simultaneously across multiple operations. Kate processed this while walking. He knew all of that when he surrendered. He did. He gave them everything he'd spent 14 months building. Everything, Marcus confirmed, willingly, with documentation. She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the outer fence of Firebase Volkov and a man standing in the dark with his hands at his sides watching her go, making a decision that she hadn't fully understood at the time and was only now beginning to understand the full weight of. He made his choice before I crossed the fence, she said. He was already decided. That's our assessment too, Marcus said. What happened inside that base, your operation, it was the catalyst. But the decision had roots that went deeper than one night. Another pause. He asked about you again, by the way. During secondary debrief, he asked if you were recovering well. Kate exhaled through her nose. What did you tell him? I told him you were ahead of schedule. He said, and I'm quoting, I expected nothing less. She stopped walking. There was something about that sentence, the shape of it, the quiet certainty in it, from a man who had spent approximately 90 minutes in her presence under extremely unusual circumstances that hit her somewhere she hadn't expected to be hit. Not sentimentally, not with warmth, but with a specific kind of recognition. The recognition of being seen accurately by someone who had every reason to see her as only a threat. Is he going to be all right? She asked. A pause. That's a complicated question in his situation. I know it's complicated. Is he going to be all right? He's cooperating fully. His information is verified and valuable. And there are people in this building who are inclined toward arrangements that reward genuine cooperation. Marcus chose his next words carefully. I can't make you promises I'm not authorized to make, but I can tell you that the people handling his case are aware of what he chose to do and why, and that awareness is informing how the process is being managed. Kate resumed walking. That's as close to a yes as you're going to give me. It's as close to a yes as the situation currently allows, Marcus said, which is more than it was 3 weeks ago. She accepted this. She filed it in the same place she'd filed all the unresolved things from that night, not forgotten, not dismissed, just held carefully until clarity arrived. There's something else, Marcus said. His tone had shifted slightly. She caught it. The operational review, he said, Hale's decision during extraction. The formal finding was released this morning. Kate kept her breathing even. What was the finding? Failure to verify KIA status in a non-verified contact situation. Premature extraction under ambiguous evidence. The review board found that standard verification protocol was not followed and that the decision to withdraw without confirmation was not supported by the information available at the time. And Hale, formal reprimand, reassignment to a non-combat advisory role pending completion of a command review period. Marcus paused. He submitted a statement. Part of it, the part that isn't restricted, was shared with me because it references you directly. Kate said nothing. She kept walking. He wrote, Marcus continued reading carefully. Sergeant Morrison's actions following my decision represent a standard of operational commitment that I failed to match in the moment that mattered most. Whatever consequence this review determines is appropriate. I accept it without reservation. The only outcome of this situation that I would contest is one in which her actions are not fully recognized for what they were. The cold morning air moved around her. She kept walking. She had a lot of feelings about Daniel Hale. Some of them were still sharp and specific in ways that 8 weeks had not significantly dulled. But she had also spent 8 weeks in the facility where the only productive activity was forward motion, and she had gotten very good at directing her energy toward what was ahead rather than cycling it around what was behind. He did the right thing in the statement, she said finally. He did. Marcus agreed. That doesn't make the other thing right. No, Marcus said. It doesn't, but it makes him someone who knew the difference. She let that sit for a moment. Is there anything else? She said. One more thing. And now there was something in his voice that was different from everything before it. Something that was almost careful in the way you are careful with something fragile or significant. The commendation requests, reads the Northern Grid COs, and 3 others that came in from people who were involved in the operation at various levels. They've been compiled and submitted to the appropriate authority for review. Marcus? Yes. What kind of commendation are we talking about? A pause, a real one, not a processing pause, the pause of someone deciding how much to say. The kind, he said finally, that doesn't get submitted in multiples for the same action unless the action was genuinely extraordinary. I'm not going to tell you what the finding will be. I'm telling you that the submissions were taken seriously by people who take very few things seriously. Kate stopped walking again. She was standing in the middle of a path between 2 buildings in the cold morning air, and she felt something move through her that wasn't pride, exactly. Pride was too clean for what it was, but something adjacent to it. Something that was more about the 41 soldiers than about herself. Something that was more about the fact that the mission had existed and she had finished it than about what anyone decided to give her for finishing it. Okay, she said. Okay. Marcus sounded like he'd expected a different response. Okay, she repeated. Thank you for telling me. You're a complicated person to deliver good news to Sergeant Morrison. I've been told, she said. I'll talk to you soon, Marcus. She hung up and stood still for another moment in the cold. 6 weeks later, she was back in a training facility running a modified physical regimen that was 60% of her pre-injury program and felt like 120% of what her right leg wanted to be doing. She pushed it past what felt comfortable and just short of what felt damaging, which was the only calculation she'd ever trusted for anything. She was 3 weeks into the graduated return when Reed called. I'm in your sector, he said. Buy you lunch. They met at a facility cafeteria that served food approximately as good as field hospital food, which was approximately as good as nothing, and sat across from each other with trays of something that was technically protein. And Reed looked at her leg with the evaluating eye of a man who had spent a significant amount of time thinking about what that leg had done and was now measuring its current state against his memory of what it had looked like when Torres pulled the splint off in the helicopter. You look good, he said. I feel functional, Kate said. That's close enough. 4 months to operational clearance Carver's estimate, 3.5 at the current rate. Reed shook his head slowly in a way that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite admiration, but was doing the job of both. Morrison, don't, she said not unkindly. I wasn't going to make a speech. You were building toward one. He almost smiled. I was building toward telling you something that I think you need to hear from a person rather than from a document. She waited. Reed set his fork down. The commendation was approved. Full citation. I found out this morning. He met her eyes directly. It's the Distinguished Service Cross Morrison. The cafeteria noise continued around them. Trays, voices, the ambient sound of people eating lunch on a Tuesday. Kate looked at Reed and felt the weight of those three words settle into her chest with a solidity that was separate from everything she'd been managing. The Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, given for extraordinary heroism in actual combat against an armed enemy force. The citation, Reed said, specifically references the solo infiltration of Firebase Volkov, the prevention of the artillery strike, the extraction of critical enemy intelligence. In this part, I want you to hear exactly. Actions that demonstrated an exceptional standard of operational commitment under conditions that would have justified cessation of mission by any reasonable measure. Kate was quiet. Any reasonable measure, she repeated. That's the language. She thought about the bottom of the ravine. She thought about 30 seconds of stillness in the decision to count forward. She thought about whether reasonable measure had ever been a category she'd consulted. I want to tell you something, she said. Go ahead. I didn't stay in that ravine and decide to be extraordinary. I stayed in that ravine and decided not to stop. Those aren't the same thing. Reed looked at her for a moment. No, he said slowly. They're not the same thing, but I think the second one is rarer than people imagine. She picked up her fork. They ate in silence for a minute, the comfortable silence of two people who had been through something together, even at a distance, even from opposite sides of a radio. The Northern Grid C, Reed said eventually. General Tanner, he's requested a meeting when you're available. A meeting. He has 41 officers and enlisted personnel who are alive and know why they're alive. He wants to look the reason into the face. Reed glanced up. His words, not mine. Kate thought about this. 41 people, 41 full lives that had continued past a morning that could have ended them because of a sequence of decisions made by one person in the dark and the cold with a broken leg and 8 rounds in a radio that had barely worked. When, she said, he said whenever you're ready, no pressure, no formal occasion. He said he'd come to you if that's easier. I'll go to him, Kate said, when I'm cleared for travel. Reed nodded, made a note of something. The meeting with General Tanner happened 6 weeks after that on a day that was unexpectedly warm for the season, the kind of day that arrives in late autumn and reminds you that the cold isn't permanent, that the weather is always in the process of changing into something else. Kate drove herself to the meeting because the leg was cleared for full weight bearing, and she had stopped accepting rides for things she could do independently. Tanner was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 40 years not wasting movement. He met her at the door of the building personally, which she hadn't expected. He extended his hand and she shook it, and he held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake and said nothing for that moment, just looked at her, and she understood that the looking was the thing he'd asked for, the actual seeing. Sergeant Morrison, he said finally. General, I've been told you don't like speeches, he said. Reed, she thought. So I'm going to keep this short. I appreciate that. I have 41 people, he said, who went to sleep not knowing what was 2 hours away from them. They woke up the next morning because you were awake when you should have been dead working, when you should have been waiting and moving north, when the last person who knew where you were had already written you off. He paused. I've been in this uniform for 40 years. I've seen courage in a lot of forms. What you did is not a category I've encountered before. Kate held his gaze. The mission was still alive, she said. Someone had to finish it. Someone did, Tanner said. You! He released her hand. They went inside. He had organized a room, not a ceremony, not a formal occasion, just a room with 41 people in it who had been told that the person who had intervened in the course of their last night on Earth was going to be present, and they were welcome to come if they wanted to. Every one of them had come. Kate stood in that room and looked at 41 faces and felt something she didn't have words for and decided that was acceptable. Some things didn't need words. Some things needed only the presence of everyone who was still there to experience them. A young sergeant in the back of the room raised his hand in an instinctive, almost childlike gesture. The kind of thing you do when you have something to say and can't figure out a more sophisticated way to signal it. Tanner nodded at him. "I just wanted to ask," the sergeant said, and his voice had the slight roughness of someone who had been preparing to say something and was now actually saying it. "When you were in the ravine, when your unit had already left, what did you think about?" The room was very quiet. Kate considered the question with the same seriousness she'd given to every other question that mattered. "I thought about the fact that the mission didn't know it had been left behind," she said, "and that someone had to tell it." The sergeant nodded slowly. He looked like a man receiving an answer that would stay with him for a long time. She drove home in the late afternoon light, with the windows down and the cold air moving through the car, and she thought about everything the night in the snow had cost and everything it had returned, and whether the balance of those two things was something she could calculate or something she just had to carry. She decided it was the second one. She decided that was all right. She had carried heavier things. She had carried them farther than anyone had expected across ground. No one had charted toward an objective that existed only because she had refused to let it disappear when the last person who knew about it turned and walked away into the storm. She had been left behind, and she had finished the mission anyway. And 41 people were alive to know the difference between those two things, between a woman who could have stopped and the woman who didn't, between the bottom of a frozen ravine and the moment she put her hands in the frozen earth and started climbing between being abandoned and refusing to let that be the last word written about what she was capable of. Kate Morrison had been declared dead at 11:47 p.m. on the worst night of her life. By morning, she had become the reason the mission survived. And no report, no ravine, no blizzard, and no order from any commanding officer who had already turned his back and walked away was ever going to change that. She had not been left behind by the mission. The mission had been waiting for her the whole time, and she had not made it wait long.